So today I'm going to be talking about cold cases and whether we should have hope that even unsolved cases will one day be solved. And I'm going to do this in reference to one famous cold case in particular, the 30-year-old case of the Golden State Killer, which was recently only solved in 2018. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief overview of the Golden State Killer's crimes, and then I'm going to talk about how he was caught, and then I'm going to discuss whether this case and cases like it should give us hope that unsolved cases will one day be solved. So, Joseph DeAngelo is a former police officer who committed at least 50 rapes and 13 murders across California, spanning 1975 and 1986. He would often break into his victims' houses while they were sleeping and often steal identification, money, and jewellery. He also attacked couples on multiple occasions, often raping the woman and murdering both of them. So this MO of breaking into the victims' houses while they slept and sometimes attacking couples and sometimes stealing from them, this is the reason why the Golden State Killer's other known moniker is the original Night Stalker, because these crimes actually took place before the crimes of Richard Ramirez, who we all know as the Night Stalker, as his crimes took place in the mid to late 80s. So, as we know, this case was only solved in 2018. This is because the attacks eventually seemed to stop and the case went cold for decades. Eventually, through contributions made by former cold case investigator Paul Holes, who actually has a podcast called Murder Squad, which is really good, they talk about and try and help solve cold cases basically. DeAngelo was eventually identified using genetic genealogy, which is a really new technique. In fact, this is the first arrest ever made through the use of genetic genealogy. This is where they take the DNA from an unknown suspect left at a crime scene and identify them through tracing their family tree. This is done through their family members who have willingly submitted their DNA to these public genealogy databases. So eventually DeAngelo was identified and then he was followed and surveilled until he dropped a tissue and his DNA was collected from it in what is referred to as an abandonment sample, where someone's DNA has been willingly discarded and therefore abandoned and so can be collected and used. DeAngelo's DNA was then input into the system and a link was found between his DNA and the DNA left at various crime scenes. So, eventually DeAngelo was arrested in 2018 and pled guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. So, should this case give us hope for cold cases being solved in the future? Firstly, funding for reopening and solving cold cases isn't in abundance and the success rates are relatively low. Findings from a national cold case investigation survey in the US estimated that 1 in 20 cold case investigations will result in an arrest and 1 in 100 will result in a conviction. Cold cases can't just be opened at random and automatically receive the funding needed for them to be investigated and solved. There are a few reasons why a cold case investigation might be conducted. The first is obviously due to something like pressure from the family or from social media or a special inquiry. These aren't too common, however, because investigating a cold case does have to be practical rather than due to social pressure because of the time and cost. Second is on the basis of availability of forensic tests, for example, DNA now being able to be tested because of advancements in technology. And lastly is when a cold case is reopened due to a confession from someone charged with another crime who then confesses to this one, maybe as part of a plea deal. Or from an eyewitness who, in exchange for leniency after they have committed a crime, is willing to identify a suspect. Now, of these three reasons for a cold case investigation to be conducted, the last one is the most likely to result in a conviction. However, you can see that no matter what, it's not a very simple process. But modern devices do increase the chances of a cold case being reopened, obtaining key information about a cold case, and hopefully a cold case investigation resulting in at least an arrest. For example, Crime Watch in the UK, a show which did reconstructions of unsolved crimes. This was proven to have a huge influence on the public and caused a massive increase in people coming forward with key information. This eventually led to a load of crimes being solved. Some famous cases which Crime Watch helped solve include the murder of James Bulger and the M25 rapist. And great news is that since DeAngelo's arrest in 2018, over 150 arrests have been made using genetic genealogy. So clearly we can have some hope that cold cases will one day be solved. Especially with advancements in technology, we can be a little bit more optimistic. But there still isn't a way for us to just magically solve all unsolved crimes, even with the technology that we have now, and time and cost is a huge hurdle that we have to be aware of. Also, in the case of the Golden State Killer, the time span between his crimes being committed and him being caught and arrested was around 30 years. And so it's clear that crimes like this can be solved, however patience is a huge element also. However, this is one of the instances where social media can be a great thing. Since evidence is so much more beneficial to a cold case investigation than social pressure, it's amazing to see that there are so many websites, blogs, and organisations committed to finding relevant information which, hopefully, will one day lead to cold cases being solved. So, in summary, of course, we should always have hope that cold cases will one day be reopened and solved. All we have to do, however, is be aware of the obstacles which stand in the way of this. But we've seen it happen, like in this case with the Golden State Killer, and so we know that it's very, very possible, which means that our hope for cold cases eventually being solved shouldn't ever really be diminished. So that's it for today, and thank God, because it's so hot, like it's Tennessee Williams hot. Any sources I've used will be linked. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye. Eventually, through contribution...